The setting sun cast long, menacing shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 19. It's the kind of road where only two types of people dare to linger: those with nowhere left to go, and the Bandits MC. They are an institution, a myth wrapped in leather and chrome, their reputation preceding them like the roar of their engines. If you lived near the Bandits, you knew their name, and you probably feared it. They were the outlaws, the definition of the rough edge of society. But like every story worth telling, the truth was far more complicated, buried beneath the noise and the judgment. Tonight, however, their usual routine of loud brotherhood and silent vigilance was about to be shattered by a quiet, desperate plea. Inside the dimly lit clubhouse, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of stale beer, motor oil, and loyalty. Hammer, the president, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard choices and untold battles, was reviewing a maintenance log with Rookie, the newest patch. Hammer wasn't just big, he was massive, with hands that looked like they could crush stone, but his eyes, deep-set and guarded, held an unsettling mix of weariness and principle. The other members, Grizz, Slick, and Ghost, were scattered around the pool table, their conversation a low rumble, the soundtrack of men who lived their lives by their own code, 1% outside the law, yet fiercely devoted to their own twisted sense of justice. They weren't looking for trouble, but trouble, as it often does, had a way of finding them. The sound that broke the silence wasn't a bike or a bar fight. It was a faint, frantic tapping at the back door, the door only ever used by members. Hammer paused, lifting his gaze. Everyone froze. They weren't expecting company, and certainly not company that knocked politely. Grizz, a mountain of muscle whose gentle demeanor was betrayed only by the scars on his knuckles, slowly moved toward the door, his hand instinctively resting on the holstered grip of his sidearm. He peered through the scratched-up window. What he saw made his massive frame still. He saw a shadow, small and trembling. He gave a sharp nod to Hammer and unlatched the heavy steel door. Standing on the threshold wasn't a rival, a cop, or a rival gang member. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He was skinny, dressed in clothes too large for his frame, and covered in grime that suggested he'd been running for a long time. His eyes, wide with a terror that looked far too ancient for a child, darted nervously back toward the dark stretch of woods bordering the clubhouse. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering, yet he stood his ground, gripping something tightly in one small, dirty hand. The tension in the room was palpable, every bandit holding their breath. A lost child on their property was unprecedented. It was a red flag the size of a freight train. Hammer approached slowly, his usual booming voice lowered to a deep, soothing gravel. "Hey there, kid. What's your name? You lost?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He just stared past Hammer, then back at the woods, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. He took a shaky step inside, his small body seeking the safety of the intimidating men in leather. He looked up at the giants surrounding him, and instead of crying or running, he found the courage to speak. His voice was a thin, reedy whisper, barely audible over the hum of the distant highway. He mumbled the words that would instantly change the bandits' night, and perhaps the trajectory of their very existence. He whispered, "He followed me home." The 4 words hit the air like a gunshot. The meaning was chillingly clear. This wasn't a runaway or a kid who lost his way. This was something darker, something predatory. Hammer's eyes narrowed, his features hardening instantly. He didn't need to ask who he was. The fear in the boy's eyes answered that question. The silence that followed was broken only by the boy's ragged breathing and the subtle click of Grizz securing the door once more. "Talk to us, son," Hammer urged, kneeling down so he was eye level with the child, making himself less imposing. "Tell us everything right now." The boy, whose name they quickly learned was Leo, finally allowed himself a moment of relief, clinging to the scrap of comfort Hammer offered. He explained, in short, desperate bursts, that he had witnessed something he shouldn't have, a volatile situation escalating in his neighborhood, a situation involving his mother and a man who was most definitely not his father. Leo had seen the man, a stranger with mean eyes and a temper like a live wire, get violent. Fearing for his mother's safety and his own, Leo had grabbed the only thing he thought could help, a worn, slightly broken superhero action figure, and fled, running for blocks, until the strange, loud, but somehow safe-looking glow of the Bandits' clubhouse lights drew him in. The chilling part, the part that turned the blood cold in every bandit's veins, was the last thing he saw. He saw the man, the monster, following him, slowly, deliberately, waiting for him to lead the way. He had led the danger right to his sanctuary. The Bandits MC had just been given a new purpose, the protection of this terrified child and his unknown mother. They weren't lawmen, but they understood justice in a way the law rarely did. They understood the obligation to protect the innocent. Their code demanded it. No hesitation. Hammer didn't hesitate. The moment Leo's whispered fear hung in the air, the clubhouse transformed from a rowdy den into a highly efficient, though unconventional command center. The code of the Bandits MC was simple. You don't mess with kids, and you don't mess with their families. Leo, terrified and alone, had claimed sanctuary, and the bandits were going to honor that claim with the full force of their loyalty and firepower. They weren't cops, and they weren't social workers. They were rough men who knew violence, and in this moment, they were going to use that knowledge to protect the innocent. This wasn't about the law. It was about right and wrong, a binary choice they understood perfectly. Ghost! Hammer's right-hand man was already on the radio, his voice a low, urgent murmur as he spoke to the perimeter guard. Eyes open. We got uninvited guests. Anyone approaches the property, you let them know the party's over, loud and clear. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. He then turned to Leo, his imposing figure somehow softening slightly. Leo, you stay right here with Slick. He's going to get you a soda and some chips. You are safe. No one gets past us. Slick, usually the one cracking jokes and counting cash, pulled up a sturdy wooden chair for the boy, his entire focus now on maintaining a calm, reassuring presence for the trembling child. Hammer got the address from Leo in bits and pieces, the name of the street, the color of the house, the number on the mailbox. It was about 15 minutes away, in a lower-income neighborhood known for its quiet desperation and overlooked conflicts. He motioned to Grizz and Rookie. Grizz was the muscle and the medic, someone who could assess a situation with brutal efficiency. Rookie, surprisingly, was the tech-savvy one, invaluable for quick street searches and background checks. Grizz, get the bikes ready. Rookie, find out everything you can about that address, who lives there, and if there's a vehicle registered to a male who isn't Leo's father. Be fast. The planning took less than 5 minutes, executed with a practiced urgency that showed they were well drilled for emergency situations, even if those situations usually involved a rival club and not domestic violence. Rookie's fingers flew across his tablet, a stark contrast to his rugged appearance. He quickly found the public records. Leo's mother was a woman named Sarah. The man Leo described was her new boyfriend, a volatile character with a string of minor priors for assault and disorderly conduct. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. They had a name, a location, and a ticking clock. This man was a known powder keg. Hammer, the car registered to the boyfriend, a beat-up blue sedan, is usually parked in the driveway, but Street View shows it gone. He might be out, or he might have parked it around the corner, Rookie reported, his voice tight. Hammer's jaw clenched. Doesn't matter. We ride. Grizz, you and me lead. Rookie, you follow our signal. No lights until we hit the neighborhood. We go silent. Then we go loud. We are not making a social call. The 3 bikes roared to life, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that sent a clear message to the still woods outside. As they pulled out onto the road, the 3 men, in their black cuts, looked every inch the villains the public believed them to be. But as they cut through the dark night, the mission was pure: protect Sarah. It was a silent conversation between them, a reminder of their shared past, the things they'd seen, and the oath they'd taken, not to the flag, but to the principle of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. This wasn't just Sarah, this was about redeeming a piece of their own souls, piece by painful piece. 15 minutes later, they idled the bikes 3 blocks from the address, plunging the street into silence, save for the distant crickets. Hammer used the darkness. his experience in navigating hostile environments guiding them through the shadowed yards until they reached the vicinity of the house. It was a small, well-kept home with a porch light casting a sickly yellow glow. They could hear it before they saw it. The muffled sounds of a verbal fight, sharp, aggressive, and undeniably male, punctuated by the high-pitched, strained voice of a woman. It was escalating. The man was home. Hammer and Grizz moved to the front door, while Rookie quickly circled the back. They saw the blue sedan parked in the alley, confirming the man's presence. There was no time for finesse. A low, guttural roar escaped Hammer's chest. He brought his boot down on the front door with a single, devastating kick that splintered the frame and sent the door flying inward, crashing against the interior wall. The sudden, violent breach of the home was the only announcement they needed. They burst into the living room, the sheer size and menacing appearance of the two bandits instantly freezing the scene of chaos. Sarah was backed into a corner, her arm raised in defense, her face etched with terror. Standing over her, his face twisted in a snarl of rage, was the boyfriend, his hand raised, ready to strike. He was tall, but against the backdrop of Grizz and Hammer, he looked small and insignificant. For a split second, the world stood still. Then, the man turned, his eyes wide in disbelief and terror, realizing that his victim had just acquired protection that was far more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. The Bandits MC had arrived and the game was over. The man, startled by the sudden violent intrusion, turned from Sarah to face the two behemoths standing in his living room. The aggression that had fueled his rage instantly curdled into sheer, paralyzed terror. He saw the leather, the patches, the sheer uncompromising menace in the eyes of Hammer and Grizz, and he knew instantly that he was facing a force far beyond the reach of his petty cruelty. This wasn't a warning. It was a reckoning. Hammer didn't say a word. He simply took a measured step toward the man, and the subtle movement of his massive frame was more threatening than any shout. The boyfriend instinctively backed away, stumbling over a discarded piece of furniture, trying to put distance between himself and the terrifying reality that had just crashed through his door. Grizz, his voice a low, gravelly thunder that echoed in the shattered silence, pointed toward the splintered front door. "Get out, now, and you don't ever come back here. If we see your shadow within 100 miles of this woman or her son, you will wish you went to jail instead." The conviction in Grizz's voice was absolute. This wasn't a threat of police action. It was a promise of swift, personal outlaw justice. The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, a pathetic sight of retreating malice, and bolted out the broken door and into the night, disappearing before the sound of the motorcycle engines had even faded from his memory. He knew he was getting off easy, and he ran like the devil himself was on his heels. Hammer finally turned his full attention to Sarah. She was still pressed against the wall, her body shaking, processing the shock. He held up his hands, showing them empty, his posture attempting to convey a non-threatening openness that was hard for a man his size. "Sarah, we're the Bandits MC. Your son, Leo, he found his way to our clubhouse. He told us you needed help. You are safe now. That piece of trash won't be back." Sarah's eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted between Hammer, Grizz, and the shattered entryway. She saw not the hardened criminals from the local legends, but the protectors who had materialized out of the darkness in her most desperate hour. Tears finally streamed down her face, not of fear, but of profound, overwhelming relief. It was Rookie, who entered quietly through the back, his movements practiced and discreet, who started the next crucial steps. He was already on the phone. Not to the police, not yet, that was always a last resort for the bandits, but to a discreet, trusted contact within the social welfare system, someone who owed them a few favors and understood the necessity of quiet intervention. Rookie explained the situation vaguely but firmly. Domestic disturbance, immediate threat removed, mother and child need protective relocation and support. The bandits knew that their intervention was temporary. They needed to ensure Sarah and Leo were given a path to permanent safety, away from the man and away from the kind of life where fear dictated every move. While Rookie secured the future, Grizz tended to Sarah, assessing her for any injuries and offering her water. He spoke in surprisingly gentle tones, an unexpected pillar of calm. Hammer, meanwhile, surveyed the damage, his mind already calculating the cost of a new door. The club would cover it, of course. It was the least they could do for one of their own. And Leo, by seeking them out, had made himself and his mother family in the only way the bandits understood. As the initial shock wore off, Sarah finally asked the question that was burning in her mind. Why? Why did you risk everything for us? Everyone says you're the bad guys. Hammer paused, his back to her, looking out the broken doorway at the quiet street. He turned, and in the dim light of the living room, his face was unreadable. Kid came to us, whispered he was followed. That's all we needed to know. We got a code, Sarah. It ain't written by judges or politicians. It's written in blood, and it says, you protect the innocent. Doesn't matter who we are on the outside. Doesn't matter what people say. When a child asks for help, you give it. No hesitation. That's the difference between an outlaw and a villain. The villain preys on the weak. The outlaw just lives by his own rules, and sometimes those rules are the only thing standing between a family and ruin. He pulled a thick wad of cash from his vest pocket, a temporary measure for immediate needs, and placed it on the kitchen counter. For a new lock and a few days of hotel bills. You listen to Rookie's contact. They'll help you disappear. Stay safe. With the threat neutralized, the financial help provided, and the wheels of social assistance turning, the bandits retreated as silently as they had arrived. They didn't seek thanks or recognition. That was never the point. As the trio roared back down Route 19, the sound of their engines was no longer menacing, but a sound of closure. They were the shadows in the dark, the unacknowledged protectors who lived outside the law, but upheld a moral standard that often surpassed it. They went back to their clubhouse, cleaned up the oil, poured a drink, and settled back into their routine. The only difference being the quiet, worn superhero action figure Leo had left behind, now sitting prominently on Hammer's desk. It was a silent trophy, a reminder that on this night, the Bandits MC had been the only heroes who dared to answer the call.